So this is rule number 6, okay? But I put rule number 5 up here as well. That was the last one because they are closely related, okay? Do not join independent clauses with a comma. And then do not break sentences in two. Okay, they're kind of like yin and yang. They're opposites, but they're both important. Okay, so last time we talked about joining independent clauses with a comma as a mistake. Right, you have to join them, or maybe a better word is separate them with a period or a semicolon, depending on the content of the sentences and whether they're related, or a comma and a conjunction. Right? So this combats run-ons, basically, this rule, number 5. Number 6 combats fragments, okay? Because if you have one complete sentence and you put a period somewhere in between, right, you're going to have a fragment on one end or the other, okay? So let's look at a couple examples of common mistakes with rule number 6. Do not break sentences in two. Okay, we'll say he was walking down the street. Okay, so hopefully we can all identify that as a complete sentence in and of itself. But then what do I do when I add something like this, talking to himself as he went? Okay, so what do I do with that? Do I make it another complete sentence, right? He was walking down the street, period, capital T, talking to himself as he went. That's a common mistake, okay? Because it kind of sounds like a complete sentence, but it's not, right? It's only a participial phrase attached to the independent clause, right? So what you should have here, instead of a period, is a comma, okay? Because talking to himself as he went is not its own sentence. It's not an independent clause. So you have to ask yourself when you're writing, right, is this a complete sentence? Does it have a subject and a verb? It doesn't. So it either has to be attached to the sentence before it or the sentence after it, right? And that depends on your own essay, okay? So this is one example of a common error, okay? Attaching a participial phrase or not attaching it, making it its own sentence. Okay. Now, another common error, okay, is one that deals with apositives. Okay. So if I had a sentence like he was an interesting person, and then I say a man who had traveled to many places. Okay, so again, do we have two sentences here or one? Okay, that's the question we have to ask ourselves. And then we have to punctuate accordingly. He was an interesting person, a man who had traveled to many places. So we can tell, right, where the separation is, but the question is, how do we separate it? Okay, and again, right here, a man who had traveled to many places is not a complete sentence, right? All that is, you have a subject, yes, you could argue that's the subject, man, right? And you could say, well, there's a verb, right, had traveled, but because of this subordinating word, we know this is a subordinate clause, not an independent clause. Subordinate clause is never a complete sentence by itself, right? So instead of putting a period here, which would be this error, right, of breaking sentences in two, I just put a comma, right? And a man is describing the person, right? It's an apositive phrase, and now I'm describing a noun. Okay? So the two situations where this mistake is commonly made, okay, are when you're attaching phrases to the already existent independent clause, and you wonder, is this a complete sentence or not? You have to be able to tell the difference between a phrase and an independent clause, or an independent clause and a subordinate clause. Okay, and that deals with both of these rules. Do not join independent clauses with a comma, and do not break sentences in two.